My mom left a voicemail saying we all agreed you are not welcome at Christmas. I did not cry or beg. I froze every account, the $2,360 mortgage, the electric, the gas, even the $4,000 catering. On Christmas Eve, their house went dark. Cards declined, guests walked out. By noon, my phone lit up with panicked calls. My name is Vivian. I am 33 years old and a senior wealth manager who finally decided to balance the family books. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. The sleek glass walls of my 40th floor office offered a panoramic view of the freezing city below. Snow was falling lightly against the glass, making the warm, ambient lighting of my workspace feel even more insulated. I sat in my leather executive chair nursing a black coffee. It was December 15th, the holiday season, and while my colleagues were buzzing about end-of-year bonuses and ski trips to Aspen, I was listening to a voicemail that would permanently alter the course of my life. I pressed the play icon on my phone screen. My mother Helen's voice echoed through the quiet room, crisp and completely devoid of warmth. Vivian, I am calling to let you know about a change of plans for the holidays. Marcus has his extended family flying in from Atlanta for Christmas Eve dinner. Since they are staying over there is simply no space for you in the house. Plus, let us be honest, you always ruin the mood anyway by sitting in the corner answering work emails. You make everyone uncomfortable with your single workaholic energy. So we all agreed it is best if you just stay in the city this year. You are not welcome at Christmas. Have a good holiday. Click. The automated voice system casually announced the end of the message. I did not gasp. I did not hurl my phone across the polished mahogany desk. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee and let the silence wash over me. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air, wrapping around the reality of our family dynamic like a suffocating blanket. I leaned back in my chair, swiveling slightly to look out at the skyline. My mother had always possessed a unique talent for delivering devastating blows wrapped in the guise of practical logistics. To her, excluding her eldest daughter from the most important family gathering of the year was simply a matter of seating arrangements and maintaining the perfect festive aesthetic. The truth, however, was far more insidious. For my entire adult life, I had been the family scapegoat. I was the one who was never quite festive enough, never quite traditional enough, never quite married enough to earn a seat at their table of approval. My sister Chloe, on the other hand, was the golden child. At 29, she had perfected the art of weaponizing her supposed fragility to get exactly what she wanted. She was currently pregnant with her first child, a fact that had essentially elevated her status from favored daughter to untouchable royalty. And then there was Marcus. Marcus, my 32-year-old brother-in-law, a charismatic black man who could charm the wallet out of anyone's pocket. He was a self-proclaimed entrepreneur who had spent the last 4 years launching one imaginary startup after another. My parents adored him. To them, Marcus was the son they always wanted, the life of the party, the visionary. To me, he was a parasite wrapped in designer clothing. The irony of my mother's voicemail was so sharp it was almost comical. She cited a lack of space in the suburban house. That house, a sprawling 5-bedroom estate with a wraparound porch and a manicured lawn, had supposedly been in my parents' name for decades. They paraded it around as the ultimate symbol of their hard-earned American dream. But as a senior wealth manager who dealt with multi-million-dollar portfolios daily, I knew the hidden truth about their precious American dream. They had nearly lost that house to foreclosure 7 years ago, when my father Richard made a series of catastrophic gambles on penny stocks. I stepped in. I restructured their debt. I quietly took over the payments to keep a roof over their heads. My mother's voice echoed in my mind again. We all agreed it is best if you just stay in the city. The word we confirmed that this was a coordinated strike. My father, my mother, Chloe, and Marcus had sat around the very dining table I paid for eating food, bought with the credit card I funded, and collectively decided I was an eyesore they no longer wished to tolerate. They wanted the benefits of my labor without the burden of my presence. They wanted the financial harvest, but they wanted to lock the farmer out of the feast. I opened my laptop. The screen illuminated my face with a cool blue light. A slow, icy smile crept across my lips. I had accepted the role of the silent benefactor watching from the sidelines, as Chloe received lavish praise for simply existing, while my grueling work weeks were dismissed as a tragic inability to find a husband. The voicemail changed the rules of engagement. They had not just uninvited me, they had discarded me with casual disdain. I was a financial auditor, a wealth manager who understood that power flowed through capital contracts and legal ownership. If they wanted to play house without me, they were going to have to do it on their own dime. I hovered my mouse over the banking icon. The entire family had made their choice. Now it was time for the final audit. I was ready. I clicked the secure login icon on my desktop, bringing up my master financial dashboard. The screen populated with a series of interconnected accounts portfolios and automatic transfers that mapped out the exact lifeblood of my family. To the outside world, Richard and Helen were successful retirees, enjoying the fruits of decades of hard work. The numbers on my screen told the actual story. I navigated to the real estate portal, clicking on the property details for their pristine suburban home. The monthly mortgage payment sat there in bold black font. $2,360. Every month for the past 7 years, that exact amount had been automatically deducted from my primary checking account. 7 years ago, my father Richard had sat weeping in my cramped apartment, confessing that a series of reckless investments had left them facing imminent foreclosure. I stepped in because I believed family protected family. I paid off the arrears, assumed the debt, and quietly transferred the deed into an LLC that I solely controlled. They got to keep their pride and their country club standing. I got a heavy financial burden that I carried without complaint. They lived in my house, yet they had just told me I was not welcome to walk through my own front door. I switched tabs to the credit card management console. 3 supplementary platinum cards were linked to my primary account. One for Helen, one for Richard, and one for Chloe. I pulled up the recent transaction history. My mother's card showed a recent charge of $400 at an upscale salon, followed by a $200 charge at a gourmet wine boutique. My father's card detailed charges at his exclusive golf club and several suspicious cash advances that I knew from experience were funding his private poker games. Then there was Chloe's card. My younger sister, who constantly boasted on social media about her independent lifestyle and her perfect marriage to Marcus, had racked up a staggering $3,000 in charges over the last 2 weeks alone. Designer baby clothes, expensive maternity wear, and luxury dinners. They lived like minor royalty, all subsidized by the single workaholic daughter they found so exhausting to be around. I scrolled through the endless rows of transactions, feeling a cold clarity wash away any lingering sense of familial obligation. I had been their invisible safety net, their personal ATM machine, smoothing over every financial disaster while they took all the credit. Finally, I clicked into the business investment portfolio. This was the most galling betrayal of all. 2 years ago, Chloe had come to me crying about how Marcus needed seed money for a revolutionary tech startup. Marcus was a smooth-talking, handsome black man who carried himself with the unearned confidence of a seasoned billionaire. He wore custom suits, spoke in buzzwords, and constantly lectured me on the importance of generational wealth and entrepreneurial mindset during family dinners. He loved to position himself as the self-made visionary, while dismissing my corporate career as uninspired. Yet his visionary startup was entirely funded by my capital. I had transferred a clean $100,000 into a business account managed by Chloe. A quick audit of that account showed a rapid depletion of funds. Marcus was not paying developers or securing patents. He was using my money to lease a luxury SUV, buy VIP tickets to networking events, and maintain his image as a successful founder. He paraded around Atlanta and our hometown acting like the ultimate provider, while quietly draining the resources of the sister-in-law he openly mocked. I opened another browser window, navigating to the utility providers. The heating bill alone for that massive, poorly insulated house was astronomical. I stared at the pending December payment hovering near $900. They kept the thermostat set to a tropical temperature all winter long, carelessly wasting energy because the consequences never reached their own bank accounts. The electricity bill was similarly inflated by the lavish holiday light displays my father insisted on installing every year to impress the neighbors. They wanted the neighborhood to see a beacon of prosperity while ignoring the fact that I was the one keeping the lights on. Every glowing bulb on their roof was paid for by my late nights at the office, reviewing endless spreadsheets and managing demanding clients. It made me sick to realize how willingly I had traded my own peace to finance their delusions. They were hosting Marcus and his relatives in a home heated by my hard work, eating food bought with my credit, and declaring that I was the one ruining the mood. The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. I moved the cursor over to my personal email inbox and found the latest invoice from the premium catering company Helen had hired for the grand Christmas Eve dinner. $4,000 for beef, Wellington roasted root vegetables, artisan pastries, and vintage champagne. The email politely reminded me that the final balance would be automatically charged to my card on file 3 days before the event. My mother had planned a magnificent feast to impress her sons, in-laws extended family acting the part of the generous matriarch. She had probably already boasted about the exquisite menu she had curated, but she had carelessly banished the only person actually paying for the food. My hand rested on the mouse as I stared at the glowing screen, absorbing the full scope of my financial enslavement. For 7 long years, I had equated money with love, believing that if I just fixed enough of their problems, they would finally value me. Instead, they had come to view my wealth as their personal right, and my presence as an annoying condition attached to it. The voicemail was not just an insult, it was a profound miscalculation. They had grown so accustomed to my silent compliance that they forgot who held the keys to their kingdom. I exhaled. The breath left my lungs in a perfectly steady and controlled stream. My hand moved the mouse with the mechanical certainty of a surgeon holding a scalpel. The first target was the credit card management portal. I navigated directly to the authorized user tab where 3 names sat in a neat little row: Helen, Richard, and Chloe. A trio of financial parasites securely attached to my primary account line. I clicked the checkbox next to my mother's name. A small digital prompt popped up warning me that the authorized user would no longer have access to this credit line and that any recurring charges linked to her physical card would fail. I clicked confirm without a fraction of hesitation. I repeated the exact same process for my father and then for my younger sister. The banking system churned for a split second before refreshing the screen. The status next to all 3 names updated to a bold red revoked. I went one step further and placed a hard administrative freeze on the entire credit line just to ensure no pending authorizations could somehow slip through the digital cracks of the banking system. By tomorrow morning, when Helen tried to buy her overpriced artisanal cheeses, or when Chloe attempted to secure another designer outfit to impress Marcus and his visiting relatives, they would be met with a declining payment terminal. The thought of that little red declined message flashing on a retail screen brought a sharp, undeniable sense of satisfaction. I was severing the financial umbilical cord, and I was doing it with the clinical precision I applied to my corporate audits. There was no messy emotion involved in this phase. It was simply a necessary reallocation of assets. My assets. They had always assumed my money was an infinite resource constantly flowing without any consequences or limits. They were entirely wrong about that. It took immense personal discipline to maintain my corporate success, and I was finally applying that exact same rigorous standard to my personal boundaries to protect my own peace. Next, I opened the utility portals. The gas and electric accounts were both legally listed under my name, but serviced their sprawling suburban address. I navigated to the billing and payment settings. The dashboard showed the automatic withdrawals scheduled for the upcoming Friday, carefully timed to keep their massive house glowing and comfortably warm through the holiday weekend. I deleted my routing and account numbers from the payment profile. The system prompted me for a replacement payment method. I left the fields entirely blank. Then I clicked on the pending December payments and hit cancel. A warning text flashed across the screen indicating that the accounts were already carrying a past due balance from November. I had intentionally scheduled the November arrears to clear alongside the December bill to save time. Canceling the scheduled transfer meant the utility companies would immediately shift the account status to severely delinquent. In the dead of winter, utility providers do not mess around with unpaid heating bills, especially when the grace period has already been completely exhausted. The gas would be shut off. The electricity would follow shortly after. Their spectacular Christmas light display, the exact one my father spent hours bragging about, to the local homeowners association would go entirely dark. The tropical indoor climate they maintained, while complaining about my presence, would plummet to match the freezing temperatures outside. Let them see exactly how warm and bright their precious holidays remained, without my invisible hand paying the piper. I closed the utility tabs, watching the automated cancellation confirmation emails hit my inbox one after another. The final piece of the execution required a slightly more personal touch. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the direct number for the premier catering company my mother had hired for the grand event. The phone rang twice before a cheerful professional voice answered the line. "Good afternoon, Bespoke Culinary Events. This is Sarah speaking. How can I assist you today?" "Hi, Sarah," I said, keeping my vocal tone perfectly level and professional. "I am calling regarding the holiday catering order for Helen. The billing account is under my name, Vivian, and I need to update the payment information." "Let me pull that invoice up for you, Vivian," Sarah replied. I heard the rapid clacking of a keyboard through the receiver. "Ah, yes, the Christmas Eve feast. We have the beef Wellington, the artisan sides, and the custom dessert spread. We have the final balance charge of exactly $4,000 scheduled to process in 2 days." "Perfect," I said. "I need you to completely remove my corporate Visa card from that file right now. I am no longer funding this event. If Helen wishes to proceed with the catering order, she will need to provide her own payment method immediately." "Oh." Sarah paused, the cheerful customer service tone faltering slightly into confusion. "I can certainly remove your card from the system, but our company policy requires full payment 48 hours prior to the holiday delivery. If she does not provide a new card, the entire order will be automatically canceled." "I understand the policy perfectly, Sarah. Please delete my card and send an updated invoice directly to Helen's email address asking for immediate payment." "I will take care of that right now, Vivian. Your card has been successfully removed from the profile." "Thank you, Sarah." I hung up the phone and set the device face down on my polished mahogany desk. The financial freeze was now fully implemented. Every single pillar supporting their extravagant holiday facade had been systematically kicked out from under them. I had funded their illusion of wealth for 7 long years, taking their disrespect in exchange for a misplaced sense of duty. Now the Bank of Vivian was permanently closed. I leaned back in my chair, lacing my fingers together. The execution was flawless. Now all I had to do was wait for the beautiful, inevitable collapse. I picked up my smartphone from the desk. The screen glowed against the dimming afternoon light of my office. I opened the messaging app and navigated to the family group chat. The thread was already bustling with activity. Chloe had sent a barrage of messages detailing the arrival schedule for Marcus and his extended family from Atlanta. She was boasting about the custom floral centerpieces she had supposedly ordered and reminding everyone to wear matching pajamas for the Christmas Eve morning photo shoot. My mother Helen had chimed in with strict instructions about the dinner dress code for the evening. My father Richard had sent a thumbs-up emoji. Not a single person had mentioned my name. Not one of them had expressed even a fraction of regret that their eldest daughter would be spending the holidays entirely alone. They had simply closed the ranks and carried on with their grand performance. Their absolute indifference washed away any remaining sliver of guilt I might have harbored. I tapped the text field at the bottom of the screen. I did not write a lengthy paragraph detailing my anger. I did not list the financial sacrifices I had made or demand an apology. Emotional outbursts were exactly what they expected from me. They thrived on drama because it allowed them to play the victim. I was denying them that satisfaction. My fingers moved swiftly across the digital keyboard. I typed a single, perfectly calm sentence. I respect the family decision. Merry Christmas. I hit send. I watched the little blue bubble appear at the bottom of the long chain of their self-absorbed chatter. Then I locked my phone and slid it into my designer handbag. The trap was set. The bridge was officially burned to ash. I walked out of my office and locked the door behind me. The timeline shifted rapidly to the morning of December 24th. While my biological relatives were scrambling around the suburbs preparing for their lavish gathering, I was stepping into the serene lobby of the Sapphire Sanctuary. It was the most exclusive luxury day spa in the city center. I was not spending Christmas Eve wallowing in self-pity in a dark apartment. I was surrounded by my chosen family. These were the people who actually valued my presence without demanding my credit card in return. Sarah, my sharp-witted colleague, who had helped me navigate the ruthless corporate ladder, stood by the reception desk, sipping a glass of cucumber-infused water. Maya, my loyal college roommate who had shared my tiny studio apartment during my early career struggles, was already browsing the treatment menu. David, my trusted mentor and fiercely protective friend, was laughing with the spa concierge. These three individuals had shown up for me during every personal crisis and professional triumph. They never asked me for a dime. They celebrated my ambition instead of calling it a character flaw. We traded our heavy winter coats for thick heated cotton robes and plush slippers. We spent the entire morning moving between the eucalyptus steam room and the thermal hydrotherapy pools. The atmosphere was completely insulated from the freezing chaos of the outside world. Soft instrumental music played from hidden speakers. The air smelled of lavender and bergamot. We sat in the private relaxation lounge overlooking the snow-covered city skyline, holding flutes of vintage champagne. Sarah raised her glass toward me with a bright smile. "To Vivian," she announced, "to protecting your peace and knowing your absolute worth." Maya and David clinked their glasses against mine. I took a sip of the crisp champagne, feeling a profound sense of lightness. For the first time in 7 years, my shoulders were completely relaxed. The chronic knot of anxiety that usually accompanied the holiday season had completely vanished. I was not stressing over whether Marcus would insult my career at the dinner table. I was not bracing myself for Helen's backhanded compliments about my wardrobe or my relationship status. I was not calculating how much overtime I would need to work in January to cover their reckless holiday spending. I was simply Vivian, a successful independent woman enjoying the fruits of her own labor surrounded by people who loved her authentically. I left my friends in the lounge and headed into a private room for a 90-minute hot stone massage. The therapist worked away the last physical remnants of my familial stress. The smooth, heated stones melted the tension from my muscles. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift into absolute tranquility. When the massage concluded, I tied my robe and walked back to the locker room to retrieve my belongings before lunch. I reached into my handbag and my fingers brushed against my smartphone. I pulled the device out, intending only to check the time. The moment the phone left the shielded confines of the metal locker, it began to vibrate. It was not a single notification. It was a frantic mechanical buzzing that shook my entire hand. The screen lit up with a cascade of alerts. Missed calls from Richard, Helen, and my sister Chloe. 5 new voicemails. 32 unread text messages in the family group chat. The notifications were rolling in so incredibly fast that the screen could barely keep up with the incoming data. Another incoming call from Helen flashed across the bright display. I stared at the buzzing device in my palm. The financial blockade had officially hit them. The catering company must have sent the updated invoice demanding immediate payment. The grocery store terminal must have rejected my mother's morning shopping run. The meticulously crafted holiday illusion was cracking wide open. The beautiful, inevitable collapse had finally begun. I did not press the green button to accept the call. I simply watched the screen flash until the call rolled over to voicemail. Then I slid the vibrating phone back into my pocket, adjusted my robe, and walked out to join my friends for lunch. The lunch spread in the private spa dining room was a masterpiece. Maya was in the middle of a hilarious story and David was laughing so hard he nearly spilled his water. I sat beside Sarah, soaking in the joyous atmosphere, while my smartphone continued to buzz against my thigh. I allowed them to suffer the silence for another 30 minutes before I finally excused myself from the table. I locked myself in the marble-tiled powder room and pulled the phone from my pocket. I tapped the voicemail icon, selecting the first message my mother left an hour ago. Helen's voice came through the speaker, dripping with profound annoyance. Vivian, I am standing at the checkout counter at the artisanal market, and the cashier is telling me my platinum card has been declined. This is completely unacceptable. Call your bank immediately and fix whatever glitch is happening. I have Marcus and his relatives arriving in 3 hours, and I cannot be standing here looking like a fool. Call me back now. I deleted the message. The next voicemail was from my father, Richard. His tone had shifted significantly from my mother's initial irritation. He sounded breathless and panicked. Vivian, pick up the phone right now. Your mother just called me in tears. The grocery store manager had to manually cancel her entire cart of imported meats and cheeses because her card kept throwing a revoked error code. She tried to use my card to cover the balance and mine was rejected too. What is going on with the accounts? We are in a crisis here. I deleted that message too. I was just about to lock the screen when the phone illuminated with another incoming call. It was Richard again. This time I decided they had stewed in the terrifying unknown for long enough. I swiped the green icon to accept the call and brought the receiver to my ear, waiting for him to speak. Vivian. Richard barked, his voice cracking with intense fury. Where the hell have you been? We have been trying to reach you all morning. Your mother was just humiliated at the premium grocer in front of half the neighborhood. The bank fraud department must have locked everything down because of some suspicious activity. You need to call your private banker right now and get this sorted out. Marcus and his family from Atlanta are landing shortly, and we have nothing prepared for the afternoon reception. I listened to his frantic breathing through the receiver. I took a slow, deep breath of the lavender-scented air. There is no bank error, Dad, I said, my voice perfectly level. No one compromised the financial data. I logged into the portal yesterday afternoon and revoked the authorization on all the supplementary credit cards. The silence on the other end of the line was so profound, I could hear holiday music playing in the background at whatever location my father was currently pacing. What did you just say? Richard finally whispered, the anger completely vanishing from his voice, replaced by a hollow dread. You revoked the cards. Vivian, what are you talking about? You cannot do that. We have hundreds of dollars of groceries we need to buy for today. I leaned closer to the mirror, examining my relaxed expression. Yes, I can do that, Dad. Those cards are legally tied to my primary account. I am the sole guarantor of that debt. Since Mom left me a clear voicemail yesterday explicitly stating that I am not welcome to attend the Christmas gathering because I supposedly ruined the mood, I made a financial adjustment. I canceled the supplementary cards. I am not attending, so I have no obligation to fund the party. You are being completely unreasonable. Richard sputtered, his voice rising in panic. Your mother did not mean it like that. She was just stressed about the seating arrangements because Marcus has so many relatives coming into town. You know how she gets when she is hosting a big event. You cannot just cut us off on Christmas Eve. We rely on those accounts to manage our daily lives. You need to turn them back on right now. You do not rely on those accounts to manage your lives, I corrected him sharply. You rely on me to completely fund a luxury lifestyle that you simply cannot afford, while simultaneously treating me like an annoying and unwanted burden. You sat at the table and agreed to banish me from the holidays. Those were always Mom's exact words. You made your choice as a family. Now you get to experience the consequence of that choice. If you want to host Marcus and his extended family, you can pay for it with your very own money. Vivian, please. Richard begged, the authoritative fatherly tone shattering. We do not have the liquidity right now. You know we are on a fixed income. If you do not turn the cards back on, the entire holiday is ruined. Marcus will be furious if his family arrives to an empty pantry. That sounds like a terrible situation for Marcus, I replied smoothly. He claims to be a wildly successful entrepreneur. I am sure a man of his immense wealth can easily cover the grocery bill for his own visiting relatives. You should ask him to step up and provide. After all, he is the son you always wanted. Before Richard could utter another pathetic excuse, I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red end call button. I stood in the quiet powder room for a moment, letting the reality of what I had just done settle into my bones. I stopped buying their fake love. That version of Vivian was officially dead. I unlocked the heavy oak door and walked back out into the bright dining room. My friends looked up as I approached the table. "Everything okay?" Maya asked. "Everything is absolutely perfect." I smiled, taking my seat. I have never felt better today. The rest of the afternoon passed in absolute bliss. My friends and I transitioned to the plush seating area of the spa lobby, extending our celebration into the early evening. We shared stories of corporate conquests and plans for the new year. I felt completely detached from the suburban drama unfolding miles away. I checked my designer watch. The delicate hands aligned perfectly at 6 o'clock. A sharp jolt of anticipation sparked in my chest. The timing was impeccable. 6 o'clock was the exact hour the premium catering company was scheduled to arrive at my parents' house to deliver the $4,000 Christmas Eve feast. I imagined the scene playing out in my childhood home. Marcus had undoubtedly gathered his visiting Atlanta relatives in the grand living room, pouring them cheap wine and offering whatever meager snacks my mother had managed to scrape together after her grocery store humiliation. They were eagerly awaiting the arrival of the lavish spread Helen had promised. Right on cue, my phone screen illuminated on the glass coffee table. An automated email notification popped up from the catering company. The subject line read, "Final payment required for delivery." I opened the message and read the brief status update, confirming that their delivery van was parked in my parents' driveway. But the drivers were strictly instructed not to unload a single tray of food until the $4,000 balance was settled in full. A second notification immediately followed. It was a frantic text message from Chloe. Her words were screaming off the screen in all capital letters. "Vivian, the catering people are here, and they are refusing to bring the food inside. They said your card was removed. Mom is having a panic attack in the kitchen. Give me your card number right now. Marcus has his entire family sitting in the living room, and we have nothing to feed them. You are ruining everything." I locked my screen and took a delicate sip of my sparkling water. I could vividly picture the glorious chaos. The delivery driver standing firm on the frozen porch, holding the invoice, while my mother desperately tried to negotiate. Helen would be putting on her best wealthy matriarch voice, trying to charm the driver into unloading the roasted vegetables and artisan pastries on credit. Corporate policies do not care about suburban social status. No money meant no food. 5 minutes later, the banking application on my phone sent a push notification. It was a declined transaction alert. This was the moment I had been waiting for all day. Marcus, driven by his fragile ego and his desperate need to impress his visiting family, had finally stepped up to play the hero. I knew exactly how he operated. He would have strutted to the front door wearing his custom-tailored suit, offering a condescending smile to the delivery driver. He would have pulled out his shiny metal business credit card, the one tied directly to the startup account I funded, and offered to cover the bill like it was loose change. He probably made some arrogant comment about how he handles the real expenses. The driver would have taken the card and run it through the mobile payment terminal while Marcus stood tall, expecting looks of admiration from his relatives watching from the hallway. Instead, the terminal beeped a harsh metallic rejection. The notification on my phone confirmed the glorious reality. Insufficient funds. Transaction declined. When I froze the authorized user cards, I also executed an immediate sweep of the business account managed by Chloe, pulling back the remaining unspent capital into my primary account. Marcus was swiping a piece of dead metal. I received another sequence of texts from Chloe. Her panic had morphed into absolute hysteria. Marcus' card just declined. The machine beeped right in front of his uncle and cousins. He tried it 3 times. The driver laughed at him and told us to have a nice night. They are driving away with the food. Everyone saw it happen, Vivian. Marcus is screaming at me in the hallway, and his family is whispering in the living room. You humiliated my husband. You embarrassed us in front of his family. Turn the money back on right now. I read the messages with a profound sense of justice. Marcus, the self-proclaimed visionary who constantly belittled my corporate career, had just been publicly exposed as a fraud who could not even afford to buy dinner. His carefully constructed facade of generational wealth had crumbled the second he lost access to my bank account. His relatives had traveled hundreds of miles expecting a luxurious feast and were instead treated to a front-row seat of a financial meltdown. I imagined the harsh whispers echoing through the grand living room. His aunts and uncles, who had been fed endless lies about his booming enterprise, were now staring at an empty dining table. The pristine holiday aesthetic Helen had demanded was entirely ruined. There would be no beef Wellington tonight. I set the phone down, letting the peaceful silence of the luxury spa contrast sharply with the suburban chaos I had beautifully orchestrated. Maya leaned over, resting her hand gently on my shoulder. She did not need to see the screen to know exactly what was happening tonight. She recognized the bright, triumphant gleam in my eye. "The dominoes are falling," she whispered with a warm, knowing smile. I nodded slowly, taking another long sip of my drink. They were falling exactly as I had carefully planned. My family had demanded a holiday without my presence, and I had delivered exactly what they asked for. They were finally alone with each other and their entirely empty pockets. The 6 o'clock crisis was a resounding success, but I knew the evening was far from over. The real consequence of their actions was still looming just over the horizon, waiting to strike when the temperature dropped. I smiled, waiting for the next inevitable alert. My friends and I finally departed the sanctuary of the spa around 7:30. We walked 2 blocks to a highly exclusive steakhouse where David had secured a private booth for our Christmas Eve dinner. The restaurant was a beautiful symphony of clinking crystal low jazz and the rich scent of roasted garlic and seared wagyu. We settled into the curved leather booth, ordering a second bottle of champagne to accompany our appetizers. I checked the weather application on my smartphone while the sommelier poured the wine. The temperature in the suburbs had just plummeted to a brutal 12 degrees Fahrenheit. A heavy winter storm warning was flashing across the top of the screen, advising all residents to stay indoors and keep their heating systems running high. I locked the screen and placed the device face up next to my fork. The stage was perfectly set. The automated utility systems were programmed to execute shutoffs for severely delinquent accounts right at the close of their standard business day, or in this specific case, exactly at 8 o'clock on a holiday eve, when emergency reconnections were absolutely impossible. I took a slow bite of my appetizer, letting the rich flavors melt on my tongue, while my mind traveled back to that sprawling suburban estate. I could easily visualize the exact sequence of events. Helen, Richard, Chloe, and Marcus were likely sitting around the dining room table attempting to salvage their dignity by serving whatever frozen pizzas or pantry scraps they had managed to find. Marcus, visiting relatives from Atlanta, would be sitting in stiff, uncomfortable silence, judging the horrific display of false hospitality. And then, the digital smart meters attached to the side of the house would receive the remote termination signal from the utility providers. In one swift mechanized motion, the massive flow of natural gas would slam shut. The electrical breaker would trip. The extravagant exterior holiday light display, the one my father proudly flaunted to the entire neighborhood, would instantly blink out of existence. The interior of the massive 5-bedroom house would plunge into absolute pitch-black darkness. The hum of the industrial-sized furnace would spin down into silence, leaving nothing but the howling wind rattling against the window panes. Right on schedule, my smartphone screen flared to life, illuminating the white tablecloth. The caller identification displayed Chloe's name. The vibration buzzed insistently against the heavy wood of the table. My friends paused their conversation, watching me with eager anticipation. I picked up the phone, swiped the green icon, and brought it to my ear. I did not say hello, I simply waited. Vivian. The power just went out. Chloe screamed into the receiver. Her voice was shrill, echoing with genuine panic and the distinct acoustic bounce of a room completely devoid of ambient electronic noise. The entire street has lights, but our house is completely pitch black. The furnace just shut off, and it is freezing in here. Marcus cannot find the flashlights and his aunt is complaining about the cold. Did you forget to pay the bill? You need to call the electric company and pay them right now. I took another sip of my champagne, savoring the crisp bubbles. I did not forget anything, Chloe. I replied, my voice as smooth as glass. I deliberately canceled the scheduled payments for both the electricity and the natural gas. Those accounts were carrying a massive past due balance from November because you all insist on running the thermostat like a tropical resort. When I pulled my payment method, the utility companies simply executed their standard shut-off protocol for delinquent accounts. Are you out of your mind? Chloe shrieked, the sound piercing my eardrum. You cut off the heat on Christmas Eve. I am a pregnant woman, Vivian. I am carrying your niece. You are endangering a pregnant woman and our guests. You are a psychopath. Turn it back on this instant or I am calling the police. Marcus is literally freezing and his family is threatening to book a hotel and leave. I leaned back against the plush leather booth. You are welcome to call the police, Chloe, but I am afraid they do not operate as a customer service hotline for unpaid utility bills. As for your guests and your husband, I suggest they start layering their clothing. You wanted a holiday without my negative energy, and now you have exactly that. The dark and the cold are just the natural environment you created for yourselves. You cannot do this to our house, Chloe cried, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs. You do not have the right to mess with the utilities of a house you do not even live in. This is Mom's and Dad's house. It belongs to the family. You are just a bitter, lonely woman taking your jealousy out on us because Marcus has a real family and you have nothing. Turn the power back on. Call the utility company right now and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you are not the homeowner and you had no right to touch those accounts. I smiled, looking around the incredibly warm and brightly glowing restaurant at my beautiful chosen family, who were watching me with quiet, supportive pride. I took a very slow, deep breath, letting the absolute perfect reality of the moment completely settle over me. The sheer entitlement pouring through the phone speaker was magnificent. Even now, shivering in the dark, she still believed she held all the authority. She still believed I was just a tenant in my own life, existing only to serve their needs. I gently swirled the remaining champagne in my crystal glass, watching the golden liquid catch the soft ambient lighting of the steakhouse. Then I delivered the final blow. Call an electrician, Chloe, I said, my tone dropping to an icy whisper. Tell them to fix it. After all, I am not the homeowner. Oh wait, on paper I actually am. I pressed the red end call button and immediately engaged the Do Not Disturb feature on my device. The phone went dark, silencing the hysterical screams of my sister. I slid it back into my handbag and returned my full attention to my perfectly seared steak. The rest of my Christmas Eve was a masterclass in joy. We laughed, we drank expensive wine, and we celebrated the end of an era. When I finally returned to my downtown luxury penthouse shortly after midnight, I slept better than I had in 7 years. Christmas morning dawned crisp and blindingly bright. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, illuminating the sleek modern furniture and the pristine white marble floors. I woke up naturally without the blaring intrusion of an alarm clock. I walked into my high-end kitchen, pressed a single button on my espresso machine, and watched the rich, dark liquid fill my favorite ceramic mug. I was wearing a silk robe, feeling completely untethered from the suburban nightmare I had successfully dismantled the night before. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out over the snow-covered city. The absolute tranquility of my morning was violently interrupted at exactly 9 o'clock. A loud, aggressive pounding echoed through my spacious foyer. It was not the polite knock of a neighbor or a delivery courier. It was the frantic, demanding pounding of people who believed they owned the world and everyone in it. I set my mug down on the kitchen island and walked slowly toward the heavy mahogany double doors of my entryway. I tapped the security monitor mounted on the wall. The high-definition camera feed revealed a truly pathetic holiday tableau standing in my private corridor. My father, Richard, was red-faced and furiously hammering his fist against the wood. My mother, Helen, stood right behind him, wrapped in a heavy winter coat, looking exhausted and furious. Beside them stood Chloe. She had draped a massive woolen blanket over her shoulders and was rubbing her slightly rounded pregnant belly with exaggerated desperation. But they had not come alone. Flanking my enraged family members were two uniformed city police officers, looking serious and ready for a confrontation. I smoothed the lapels of my silk robe, unlocked the deadbolt, and swung the heavy door open. I did not flinch. I did not look surprised. I simply leaned against the doorframe and raised a single eyebrow. "Merry Christmas," I said, my voice perfectly calm and conversational. "Can I help you?" Helen lunged forward, her face twisted in absolute rage. "Do not you dare wish us a Merry Christmas, you monster!" she shrieked. Her voice echoed loudly down the pristine hallway. "You left us to freeze in the dark." Marcus and his family had to sleep in their rental cars, with the heaters running just to survive the night. His relatives are booking flights back to Atlanta right now. You completely destroyed our holiday and humiliated us. Chloe pushed past our mother, ensuring the police officers had a clear view of her tear-stained face. She leaned heavily against the hallway wall, acting as if her legs could barely support her. "Officer, this is the woman I told you about," Chloe whimpered, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "She is my sister, and she intentionally cut the power and the gas to our house in the middle of a blizzard. I am carrying a child. I spent the entire night shivering in the freezing dark. She knew I was pregnant, and she tried to freeze my baby. This is attempted murder." Richard puffed out his chest, trying to leverage his older, authoritative dad persona for the authorities. "Officer, I want her arrested for financial abuse of the elderly and reckless endangerment. She manages our finances and maliciously locked us out of our own bank accounts. She stole our money and then weaponized our utility accounts to torture us. We are senior citizens and she left us in life-threatening conditions. Put her in handcuffs right now." The taller of the two police officers stepped forward, placing himself between my screaming family and my calm demeanor. He rested his hand on his utility belt, looking at me with severe disapproval. His gaze swept over my luxurious silk robe and the expensive penthouse visible behind me, clearly contrasting my comfort with my shivering family. "Mom," the officer said, his tone sharp and authoritative. "Is it true that you intentionally terminated the heating and electrical services to the residence where your elderly parents and pregnant sister reside?" I looked at the officer, maintaining direct and unflinching eye contact. I did not raise my voice. I did not match their frantic energy. I simply offered a polite, cooperative smile. "Officer, I canceled the automatic payments from my personal checking account to those utility providers because I am no longer willing to pay their bills. If the power was shut off, it is simply because the accounts were severely delinquent." "She is lying!" Chloe shrieked, interrupting me. "It is our house. She hijacked the accounts to punish us because she is jealous of my marriage. She committed fraud. She does not even live there. Arrest her." I slowly shifted my gaze from the officer to my sobbing sister. "You are absolutely correct, Chloe. I do not live there. And I did stop paying the bills. But you forgot to mention one tiny crucial detail to these nice officers before dragging them all the way up to my penthouse on a holiday morning. You forgot to tell them the truth about who legally owns the entire property. You forgot to mention to them that you are simply non-paying guests illegally occupying my house." The officers frowned immediately, turning to look at my parents with suspicion. "Please come in, officers. I have all of the official legal paperwork sitting right here on my desk, ready for your immediate review." I stepped aside, pulling the heavy door open to grant full access. The police officers exchanged a cautious look before stepping into my foyer. My parents and Chloe followed, their boots tracking melted snow onto the marble floor. Helen glared at my artwork while Richard sneered at the furnishings, but neither dared speak out of turn. Chloe kept up her shivering act, clutching her blanket tightly as she waddled into my living room. I led the group to my glass dining table, where a black leather binder sat perfectly centered. I had prepared this, anticipating their entitlement might require legal intervention. I never expected them to be foolish enough to bring the police to facilitate their own absolute destruction. I gestured for the taller officer to step closer. I flipped open the heavy cover. The first document was a certified copy of the property deed. "Officer, please review the ownership details on this officially recorded deed," I said, keeping my tone devoid of emotion. "The property address currently experiencing a utility shutoff is listed at the top." The officer leaned over the table. His eyes scanned the legal text before landing on the highlighted section. He read the name aloud. Vivian, sole owner. He looked up, his brow furrowing as he faced my father. "Sir, you explicitly told my partner and me that you were the homeowner and that your daughter illegally hacked into your personal utility accounts." Richard puffed out his chest, his face flushing crimson. "It is our family home, officer. I bought that house 30 years ago. I raised my children there. She just holds the paper because we had a minor financial restructuring a few years back. It is a technicality. It is our property, and she maliciously shut off the heat to freeze her pregnant sister." I calmly turned the page. "It is not a technicality, Dad. It is a legally binding transfer of ownership in exchange for clearing massive debt you accumulated through reckless gambling." I looked back at the officer. "I paid off the foreclosure 7 years ago, assuming financial liability. In return, I took sole legal ownership. They are not tenants. They do not pay rent. They have no lease agreement. Legally speaking, they are simply guests who overstayed their welcome by 7 years." The second officer, a shorter woman, stepped forward to inspect the documents. She flipped through property tax records, mortgage statements, and utility bills. All bore my name. All proved I was the sole financial provider for the estate. She looked at Helen and Chloe. "Mom," the officer said, addressing my mother, "are you paying rent to your daughter? Do you have any written documentation proving tenancy?" Helen scoffed, waving her hand. "We do not pay rent to our own child. That is absurd. We gave her life. We raised her. That house belongs to the family. She is acting out because she is a bitter spinster who hates seeing her younger sister happily married and expecting a child. She is trying to punish us." The taller officer crossed his arms over his chest. The sympathy he had shown my shivering sister completely vanished. "Ma'am, I do not care about family drama. I care about the law. The law says this woman owns the property. If there is no lease agreement and you are not paying rent, you are legally classified as guests. A property owner is not legally obligated to maintain active utility accounts for non-paying guests. She did not commit fraud. She did not hack your accounts. She simply canceled her own payment methods on her own bills." Chloe let out a dramatic gasp, gripping the glass table. "But I am pregnant," she wailed. "You cannot just freeze a pregnant woman. The law has to protect babies. We spent the whole night freezing. Marcus had to wrap me in 5 blankets. We could have died." I flipped to the third section and slid a printed email confirmation across the table. Officer I notified Helen via voice message that I would not participate in their holiday gathering and subsequently removed my financial support. They had ample time to contact utility providers and establish new accounts under their own names, using their own credit cards. The fact they chose not to pay for their heat is a consequence of their financial negligence, not a criminal act on my part. The female officer nodded, reviewing the printed email. She looked at Richard with a stern expression. "Sir, you brought us here under false pretenses. You claimed a crime had been committed. Filing a false police report is a serious offense. Your daughter broke 0 laws. If you want the heat turned back on, you must call the utility company and set up an account in your name." Richard slammed his fist onto my table, causing the binder to jump. "We cannot do that," he shouted, his voice echoing in the penthouse. "She knows we cannot do that. Our credit is ruined. The utility companies require massive deposits for new accounts with our credit scores. We do not have that kind of cash lying around. She planned this to ruin us." I smiled, offering a slight shrug. "That sounds like a personal financial problem, Dad. I am a wealth manager, not a charity organization. You enjoyed free housing, electricity, gas, and a luxury lifestyle for 7 years. The free ride is officially over. You came to my home on Christmas morning with police hoping to bully me into submission. Instead, you proved to the authorities that you are financial parasites. The officers exchanged a final confirming look, making it obvious they were done wasting their holiday shift on this nonsense. The situation was entirely resolved in their eyes, without a single arrest being made. There was no crime committed here today, only a remarkably pathetic family of entitled adults throwing a desperate tantrum because their primary funding source had finally cut the cord that kept them afloat for many years. The taller officer closed the black leather binder and slid it back across the glass dining table toward me. His posture shifted entirely. He was no longer an investigator trying to unravel a domestic dispute. He was an enforcer of the law looking at 3 adults who had actively wasted city resources on a holiday morning. He hooked his thumbs into his utility belt and fixed a hard stare on my father. "Sir, I suggest you lower your voice and step back from the table," the officer commanded. "You called emergency dispatch claiming a life-threatening crime was occurring. You dragged my partner and me away from our duties on Christmas morning to mediate what is essentially your refusal to pay your own bills. This woman is the sole legal owner of the property where you reside. She provided irrefutable documentation proving her ownership and her financial liability. You provided absolutely nothing but screaming accusations." Helen stepped forward, her face still twisted in righteous indignation. "But she is our daughter," Helen argued, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "You are police officers. You are supposed to protect the vulnerable. We are elderly. Chloe is pregnant. You cannot just let her treat us this way. There must be a law against a child abusing her parents like this." The female officer shook her head, a look of pure disgust crossing her features. "Ma'am, there is no law against a property owner refusing to pay for services they do not use." The female officer stepped closer to Helen, forcing my mother to take a step back. "What there is a law against is filing a false police report. There are laws against harassment. There are laws against trespassing. Right now, you are dangerously close to violating all 3 of those criminal statutes." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but the taller officer cut him off instantly. "Do not say another word, sir. You have absolutely zero legal standing here. You are guests in her suburban property, and right now you are uninvited guests in her private penthouse. The fact that you share biological DNA does not give you a free pass to exploit her financially or to use the police department as your personal collection agency." Chloe clutched her blanket tighter, trying to push out a few more tears. "So we are just supposed to go back and freeze to death," Chloe sobbed, wiping her perfectly dry eyes. "What about my baby? What about Marcus? We have no heat and no food." The female officer looked at Chloe with absolute zero sympathy. "Then I suggest you and your husband book a hotel room, Mom. Or you can call the utility companies and set up a payment plan. You are adults. Act like it. You cannot demand that your sister fund your lifestyle and then call the police when she decides to close her checkbook. If you truly feel unsafe in that house, you are free to leave it. No one is holding you captive." The taller officer turned to me, his expression softening just a fraction. "Mom, do you want them removed from your property right now?" I looked at my parents and my sister. They looked completely pathetic. Their grand plan to bully me into submission using law enforcement had backfired with spectacular precision. I took a slow breath, enjoying the absolute silence that had fallen over them. "Yes, officer," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I want them removed immediately. They are trespassing. I also want it officially documented that they are no longer welcome at this address. If they return, I will press charges for harassment without any hesitation." "You heard the lady," the taller officer said, pointing a stern finger toward the heavy mahogany doors. "Move toward the exit right now." Richard stared at me, his fists clenched tight at his sides. His entire worldview built on patriarchal control and unearned respect was shattering in real time. "You are making a massive mistake, Vivian," Richard growled, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are destroying this family." I picked up my coffee mug and took a slow sip. "I did not destroy anything, Dad. I just stopped paying for the illusion. Now please leave my home before these officers place you in handcuffs. The police officers physically stepped toward my parents, herding them toward the spacious foyer. Helen grabbed Richard's arm, her face pale with absolute humiliation as the reality of their situation finally set in. They were being escorted out of a luxury penthouse like common criminals. Chloe followed behind them, her theatrical shivering completely forgotten in the face of actual legal consequences. The officers guided them out into the private carpeted corridor. The heavy doors remained open as the police ensured they moved toward the elevators. "Sir, I am giving you a formal warning," the taller officer said, his voice echoing sharply in the hallway. "Do not return to this property under any circumstances. Do not call emergency dispatch again regarding your unpaid utility bills. If we have to respond to another false report involving your family, we will be making arrests. Do you understand me perfectly?" Richard nodded stiffly, unable to muster a single word of defiance. Helen covered her face with her hands, trying to hide her profound embarrassment from the officers. Chloe just stared at the marble floor, completely defeated. The officers tipped their hats to me and stepped onto the waiting elevator, leaving my family stranded in the corridor. I stood in the doorway watching them wallow in their own disgrace. I was preparing to close the door and return to my peaceful morning when the second elevator chimed loudly. The polished metal doors slid open, revealing a highly agitated figure stepping out onto my private floor. It was Marcus, marching forward with fury burning in his eyes, ready to defend his shattered pride. The true confrontation was only just beginning right outside my door. I smiled, waiting for him. Marcus stormed down the private corridor with heavy, aggressive steps. His tailored suit looked rumpled from his night freezing in the suburban house, but his arrogance remained perfectly intact. He shoved past my bewildered parents and my shivering sister, pushing his way right up to my threshold. "You think you are so powerful," Vivian Marcus snarled. "You sit up here throwing your dirty money around and treating real families like garbage. You are completely out of touch with reality. You have zero concept of what it takes to build something from the ground up and be a true provider. You just punch numbers into a spreadsheet and act like you are superior to people who actually hustle. You humiliated my wife. You disrespected my relatives who flew from Atlanta just to see me. You are nothing but a bitter, lonely woman hiding behind a corporate paycheck because you cannot secure a man or build a legacy of your own." I did not step back from his aggressive posture. I simply maintained my calm smile and gestured toward the glass dining table sitting in the center of my living room. "I am so glad you decided to show up, Marcus," I replied smoothly, stepping aside to grant him access. "Please step inside for a moment. Since you are so incredibly passionate about building legacies and operating as a true provider, I have some financial documents I would love to review with you." My parents and Chloe lingered in the hallway, completely paralyzed by the shifting power dynamics. But Marcus marched into my penthouse with his chest puffed out, ready to assert his dominance. I walked over to the table and picked up a thick manila folder I had deliberately separated from the main legal binder. This folder contained the absolute destruction of Marcus and his carefully curated entrepreneurial facade. He stood across from me, crossing his arms over his chest, waiting for me to speak. I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of banking statements, tossing them carelessly onto the glass surface between us. "Let us talk about your visionary hustle, Marcus," I began, my voice dropping to a sharp professional cadence. "2 years ago, you launched your revolutionary tech startup. You bragged to every single person in our hometown and all of your relatives in Atlanta that you secured a massive seed funding round of $100,000 from a highly exclusive silent angel investor. You used that exact narrative to establish yourself as a financial genius." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the top highlighted document. "Did you ever wonder who that silent angel investor actually was?" Marcus stared at the paper, his arrogant expression faltering as he recognized the banking logos. "That money did not come from a venture capital firm, Marcus. It came directly from my personal savings account." I funneled exactly $100,000 through Chloe's accounts because she begged me to support your pathetic dream. You are not a self-made provider. You are my financial dependent. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving behind a mask of absolute shock. He opened his mouth to formulate an excuse, but I immediately silenced him by throwing the next set of documents onto the table. But the origin of your funding is not even the most interesting part of this comprehensive audit, I continued relentlessly. It is how you chose to spend my capital that truly fascinated me. You did not hire software developers. You did not secure patents or rent legitimate office space to build this company. I pulled out the registration paperwork for his pristine luxury SUV. You used corporate seed money to lease a high-end vehicle. You used business funds to purchase custom suits, buy VIP club tables, and maintain the ridiculous illusion of wealth. You committed textbook financial commingling. That is not just poor business management, Marcus. That is highly illegal. And as a certified financial auditor, I have a strict legal obligation to report such blatant financial misconduct. Marcus gripped the edge of the glass table, his knuckles turning white. You are lying, he stammered, his voice completely devoid of its previous arrogant boom. You would not do that to family. I absolutely did, I replied, handing him the final piece of paper. It was a printed confirmation receipt from the Internal Revenue Service. I officially reported your entire corporate entity to the IRS for gross tax fraud and the deliberate misuse of business capital. They will be launching a comprehensive audit into your startup account by the end of the month. They will meticulously review every single luxury dinner, every single custom suit, and every single tank of gas you purchased with my money. When the federal agents discover that you intentionally funneled commercial investments into personal luxury assets, you will face massive penalties. You will likely face severe criminal charges for tax evasion. Your fake empire is completely over. You wanted to play the role of the big successful businessman so desperately that you forgot to actually build a legitimate business. The tall, proud man who had stormed out of the elevator just minutes ago completely collapsed in on himself. His shoulders slumped, and his hands began to tremble as he stared at the federal reporting confirmation document. The realization that he was facing the terrifying power of the federal government shattered his fragile ego. He looked back toward the hallway where Chloe was watching him with wide, terrified eyes. His visiting relatives back at the freezing suburban house would soon discover that the man they admired was nothing more than a fraud facing federal prosecution. I leaned across the table, looking directly into his panicked eyes. You came in here calling my money dirty, I whispered coldly. But you were perfectly happy to use my money to buy your entire identity. Now you get to explain to your pregnant wife, your parents, and the federal government exactly why you are going to prison. Get out of my house, Marcus. Your audit is officially complete. Marcus stumbled backward. The documents remained on the glass table, a perfect monument to his failure. He turned, moving with the stiff steps of a man walking to the gallows. He crossed the living room and stepped out into the private corridor where my parents and sister waited under the supervision of the police officers. The taller police officer gestured toward the elevator, indicating their time was now up. Chloe reached out to grab Marcus by the arm, looking for reassurance. She expected her provider to put me in my place. Instead, Marcus refused to meet her eyes. He kept his gaze firmly fixed on the carpet, paralyzed by the looming reality of a federal tax investigation. The illusion of his wealth was dead. He lacked courage to confess to his pregnant wife that he had condemned them to ruin. My mother Helen could not handle the silence. Her entire life was built on asserting dominance. As the female police officer pressed the elevator call button, Helen spun around to face me one final time. Her eyes burned with venomous spite. You think you have won, Vivian? Helen sneered, her voice dripping with malice. You think because you hold the deed to the suburban house and froze our daily accounts that you left us with nothing? I leaned comfortably against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I did not say a single word. I simply let her dig her own grave. I knew you would eventually turn on us, Helen continued, taking a step toward me, but stopping when the officer shifted his stance. You have always been a bitter, jealous girl. That is why your father and I took precautions. We knew we had to protect Chloe and her baby from your treachery. You thought you controlled the family real estate, but you forgot about the sprawling rural property upstate. The 50 acres of pristine, undeveloped land your grandfather left us. Chloe lifted her head, a sudden spark of triumphant hope lighting up her tearful face. Helen smiled, a twisted, victorious expression. That is right, Vivian. I secretly transferred the entire deed of the upstate rural property directly into Chloe's name 3 weeks ago. It is legally hers now. A completely unencumbered asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. She and Marcus can sell it tomorrow and buy a beautiful new home far away from your toxic control. You get to sit alone in this cold high-rise while your sister cashes out the true family legacy. You lose. The elevator chimed a sharp, metallic sound. The polished steel doors slid open. The police officers motioned for my family to step inside. Helen lifted her chin, marching into the elevator cab with the haughty pride of a conquering queen. Chloe followed closely, casting a smug, superior glare in my direction. Marcus shuffled in last, staring at the floor, unresponsive to Helen's triumphant declaration. The officers stepped in. I looked directly at my mother as the steel doors began to slide shut. I did not look angry. I did not look defeated. I offered her a bright, genuine smile and a polite wave. Have a wonderful holiday, Mom, I said clearly. The doors sealed shut, cutting off my family from my life. I stepped back into my penthouse and pushed the heavy mahogany door closed. The deadbolt engaged with a satisfying click. The silence in my entryway was absolute and perfectly serene. I walked slowly back to the kitchen island and picked up my ceramic mug of coffee. It was still warm. I took a slow sip, savoring the absolute perfection of the morning. Helen actually believed she executed a masterful strategic maneuver. She truly believed she had outsmarted the senior wealth manager of the family by secretly transferring that 50-acre rural property to her precious golden child. I let out a soft laugh. I knew exactly what that rural land was. I knew every detail about its financial history because I originally audited my father's catastrophic debt 7 years ago. Helen operated under the delusion that the land was a pristine, unencumbered asset. She was willfully ignorant of the fact that Richard secretly took out 3 high-interest loans against that specific property to fund his illegal gambling habits before he came crying to me. The rural land was a ticking financial time bomb. The property was currently underwater, buried beneath hundreds of thousands of dollars in massive predatory liens and years of unpaid back taxes. It was completely unsellable. The only reason the predatory lenders had not seized it yet was because it was tied up in a complex holding trust. But Helen had just dissolved that trust and transferred the deed directly into Chloe's name. By putting the property in Chloe's name, Helen legally transferred all the attached debt and massive tax liabilities directly onto my younger sister. The moment the county clerk's office processed that deed, transfer the predatory lenders and the state tax authorities would immediately be notified of the new legal owner. They would aggressively descend upon Chloe, demanding immediate payment in full. Helen pushed her into the ocean. Between Marcus facing a federal audit from the Internal Revenue Service for tax fraud and Chloe unexpectedly inheriting massive predatory debts, their financial destruction was guaranteed. They were going to be hunted by federal agents and ruthless debt collectors simultaneously. My mother had orchestrated the final fatal blow herself, all while believing she was securing their glorious future. I walked over to the glass dining table and gathered the manila folder and the black leather binder. I neatly stacked the documents, feeling a profound sense of closure. My family demanded to be independent. They demanded a life without my interference. Now they were free to navigate the brutal consequences of their own deceit. I knew exactly what Chloe would do next. She would run straight to social media to play the victim. I walked to my home office, ready to prepare my digital counterstrike. I settled into the ergonomic leather chair in my home office and woke up my multi-monitor workstation. The screens flickered to life, casting a cool glow across the room. I knew my sister Chloe possessed a severe addiction to public sympathy. She fed on social validation the way a starving animal craved a meal. Getting escorted out of a luxury penthouse by the police was a massive blow to her fragile ego. She needed to rebuild her victim narrative immediately, and she needed an audience to validate her suffering. I did not have to wait long for her performance to begin. Within 45 minutes, my smartphone began to vibrate continuously against the polished surface of my desk. It started with a single notification from Facebook. Then came an alert from Instagram. A moment later, the family group chat resurrected itself with a sudden barrage of activity. Soon the device was buzzing with such violent frequency that it actually shimmied an inch across the desk. I ignored the chaotic noise and opened a web browser on my main monitor, navigating directly to Chloe's public social media profile. There it was, a massive 3-page sob story posted for the entire world to see. She had uploaded a heavily filtered black and white photograph of herself, wrapped in the thick woolen blanket, looking mournfully out a frosted window. The caption was a masterclass in emotional manipulation and absolute fiction. Chloe described our Christmas Eve as a terrifying Dickensian nightmare. She claimed that I had maliciously hacked into our parents' utility accounts and terminated the heating services in the dead of winter simply because I was jealous of her perfect marriage. She wrote paragraphs about how she sat shivering in the freezing dark, terrified for the life of her unborn child. She painted a vivid, heroic portrait of Marcus, describing how he bravely searched the neighborhood for firewood and sacrificed his own body heat to keep her warm. She completely omitted the fact that Marcus had just been publicly humiliated by a catering driver because his credit card declined. She detailed how our elderly parents wept in the living room, entirely devastated by the cruelty of their eldest daughter. She ended the lengthy post with a plea for prayers, claiming that she was traumatized by my cold-blooded betrayal, but remained grateful for the unwavering love of her devoted husband and her supportive extended family. The response from our extended family and Marcus relatives in Atlanta was instantaneous and ferocious. The comment section under Chloe's post turned into a public execution of my character. Relatives who had not spoken to me in over a decade were suddenly experts on my psychological profile. They called me a soulless corporate machine, a bitter spinster, and a monster who deserved to die alone. The public outrage quickly spilled over into my private inbox. My phone screen lit up with a direct text message from my Aunt Martha. "You are completely dead to this family, Vivian. To leave a pregnant woman to freeze on Christmas Eve is a level of evil I cannot even comprehend. Do not ever show your face at a family gathering again." A moment later, my cousin Greg chimed in. "I always knew you were an arrogant snob, but trying to kill your own niece is psychotic." Marcus' Atlanta relatives were even more aggressive, defending their golden boy. Marcus' aunt sent a scathing paragraph accusing me of looking down on him because of his race and his entrepreneurial spirit. She called my wealth dirty money and praised Marcus for being a real man who protected his pregnant wife from my supposed abuse. The notifications poured in like a digital avalanche. Hate-filled emails, angry voicemails, and furious direct messages flooded every single platform I maintained. They demanded that I apologize. They demanded that I turn the power back on. They threatened to expose my behavior to my corporate clients and my employers. They wanted to drag my professional reputation through the mud and ensure that everyone in my industry knew exactly what kind of monster I truly was. They believed their collective outrage would intimidate me into submission. They assumed the overwhelming pressure of public shame would force me to apologize and beg for their forgiveness. I sat perfectly still in my quiet office, reading every single hateful message with absolute emotional detachment. I did not feel the slightest urge to defend myself. I did not type out angry responses or attempt to correct their completely fabricated narrative. Engaging with them in the comment section would only validate their hysteria and give them the attention they desperately craved. I wanted them to scream. I wanted them to gather their pitchforks and stand proudly on their moral high ground. The higher they built their pedestal of righteous indignation, the more devastating their inevitable fall would be. Every angry comment supporting Marcus was a beautiful gift. Every relative attacking my financial control was unknowingly setting themselves up for absolute humiliation. They were rallying behind a man who was currently under federal investigation for tax fraud. They were weeping for a mother who had just legally transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars of predatory debt directly onto her pregnant daughter. They were defending a father who had gambled away the very house they claimed I stole. They were loudly and proudly attaching their own reputations to a sinking ship. I picked up my phone and toggled the silent mode, ensuring the frantic buzzing would no longer distract me from my work. I let them have their moment of digital solidarity. I let Chloe soak in the hundreds of sympathy likes praising her bravery. I wanted her to feel secure in her false victory. I wanted Marcus' relatives to feel justified in their defense of his character. I turned my attention back to my glowing workstation monitors. I opened a new folder on my desktop and began organizing the highly classified financial documents very carefully. I opened a secure web hosting platform and purchased a new domain name. I kept the URL incredibly simple and professional, using just our family surname followed by the word audit. There was no need for flashy graphics or emotional diatribes. As a senior auditor, I knew that numbers spoke much louder than any tearful narrative ever could. I selected a clean, minimalist template that resembled a corporate financial disclosure report. The background was stark white. The text was crisp black. I created 5 distinct navigation tabs across the top header of the web page. Each tab was meticulously labeled to address a specific lie Chloe had posted in her dramatic social media manifesto. I wanted the interface to be absolutely user-friendly so that every single outraged relative could easily navigate through the undeniable truth of their golden family. I clicked on the first tab, which I titled Residential Ownership and Utilities. I uploaded high-resolution PDF scans of the original foreclosure notice Richard received 7 years ago. I placed it directly next to the legally binding property deed transfer, proving I had assumed all financial liability to save them from homelessness. Then I uploaded the complete historical ledger of the utility bills. I highlighted the outrageous monthly heating costs and the electrical surges caused by their massive holiday light displays. I added a screenshot of my payment cancellation confirmation from the utility provider portal. The timestamp clearly proved I did not hack into their accounts in the middle of the night. I simply removed my personal credit card from my own legal accounts days prior to the event. The numbers laid bare the absolute absurdity of Chloe's claim that I had attempted to murder her. I was just a property owner who finally stopped subsidizing my non-paying guests. The second tab was dedicated entirely to my pregnant sister. I named it Chloe's Financial Independence. Here I uploaded the comprehensive transaction history of her supplementary platinum credit card over the past 24 months. I used a digital red marker to highlight the most egregious luxury purchases: $2,000 at a designer handbag boutique, $500 for premium spa treatments, $800 on imported baby clothes. I placed these highlighted statements right next to a screenshot of her latest social media post, where she claimed to be a struggling young mother victimized by her wealthy sister. The stark contrast between her digital poverty act and her actual spending habits was magnificent. I also included the specific notification showing when her card was finally revoked, proving she was cut off before the holiday, not during the blackout. The third tab was reserved for the star of the family. I titled it The Marcus Investment Fund. This was the section that would completely annihilate his reputation with his Atlanta relatives. I uploaded the initial wire transfer receipt showing exactly $100,000 moving from my personal savings directly into his supposed business account. Below that, I posted the itemized ledger of his corporate spending. There were 0 receipts for software development or office space. Instead, I displayed the lease agreement for his luxury SUV signed using the startup capital. I uploaded the receipts from VIP nightclubs, expensive steakhouses, and custom tailors. To ensure there was no ambiguity, I attached the official confirmation document from the Internal Revenue Service, acknowledging my formal report of his tax fraud and financial commingling. Anyone looking at this page would instantly understand that Marcus was not a visionary provider. He was a complete financial parasite living entirely off his sister-in-law while using my money to fund a fraudulent lifestyle. The fourth tab focused strictly on my father. I named it Richard's Legacy. I uploaded the deeply hidden financial documents detailing the massive gambling debts he had accumulated over the years. I scanned and posted the promissory notes and the high-interest casino loans that had initially driven our family to the brink of absolute ruin. I included the bank transfers proving that I was the one paying off his secret poker losses to keep the collectors away from their suburban estate. He loved to portray himself as a wise patriarch steering the family toward prosperity. These documents proved he was nothing more than a reckless addict who repeatedly sacrificed his family's stability for another hand of cards. His entire authoritative persona was built on a foundation of my silent bailouts. The fifth and final tab was my absolute masterpiece. I named it Helen's Generational Wealth. I uploaded the official county clerk records for the 50-acre rural property my mother had so proudly transferred to Chloe. I placed the new deed showing Chloe's name right next to the 3 massive predatory liens and the years of unpaid back taxes attached to the land. The documents clearly demonstrated that the property was heavily underwater. I highlighted the specific legal clauses proving that by accepting the deed transfer, Chloe had legally assumed all of the attached financial liabilities. Helen had not gifted her daughter a valuable asset. She had essentially handed her a ticking financial time bomb that would result in immediate collection efforts from ruthless creditors. The evidence was completely indisputable. I reviewed the entire webpage, checking every link and every PDF file to ensure flawless execution. The silent counterstrike was ready. I clicked publish and watched the website go live to the world. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and took a slow, deliberate breath. The site was a digital fortress of undeniable truth. It was fully optimized to load quickly on mobile devices, ensuring that every single outraged relative could access the files instantly. I copied the freshly minted web address to my clipboard. It was time to deliver the payload. I opened the group chat ready to strike. This would be the end of their lies and the absolute beginning of their public ruin. I smiled at the glowing screens. I felt completely victorious today. I pasted the freshly minted web address into the text field of the main family group chat. The screen was still scrolling with a frantic barrage of notifications. My Aunt Martha was typing yet another aggressive paragraph about family loyalty and the sacred duty of siblings to protect one another. Marcus' cousin from Atlanta had just sent a barrage of angry emojis, demanding I apologize for disrespecting their bloodline and treating a pregnant woman with such callous disregard. I did not add a lengthy explanation or a dramatic preamble to my message. I simply typed a single sentence to accompany the link. For anyone interested in the actual financial truth behind the holiday blackout, please review the comprehensive audit here. I hit send. I immediately navigated to Chloe's public post, which was currently sitting at over 400 sympathetic likes and 80 outraged comments. I pasted the exact same sentence and link as a top-level comment. Then I pinned the link to my own social media profiles, ensuring that any mutual acquaintances, colleagues, or extended family members who visited my page would immediately encounter the undeniable truth. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and watched the digital battlefield unfold across my glowing workstation monitors. The transformation was absolutely instantaneous. The chaotic rapid-fire typing indicators in the family group chat suddenly vanished. The relentless vibrating of my smartphone ceased completely. It was as if a massive digital vacuum had sucked all the oxygen out of their echo chamber, leaving nothing but a vast, echoing void. I could see the read receipts ticking upward as one by one my aunts, uncles, and Marcus, extended relatives, clicked the link. I imagined the collective gasp rippling through living rooms across the country as they landed on the stark professional homepage. There was no emotional ranting for them to argue against. There were only cold, hard numbers and government-certified documents. I monitored the site traffic analytics on my secondary screen, watching the unique visitor count spike dramatically in real time. They were opening the distinct tabs. They were downloading the high-resolution PDF files. They were zooming in on the credit card statements. The silence stretched for 10 long, agonizing minutes. 10 minutes of absolute, undeniable devastation for my immediate family. I knew exactly what was happening in that suburban house right now. The panic would be setting in as Helen realized her carefully curated high society image was burning to ash in front of her entire bridge club. The first specific piece of evidence to detonate was Chloe's section. My phone chimed with a direct message from my cousin Greg, the same cousin who had called me a psychotic monster just an hour ago. His message simply read, "Is this real?" I did not reply. The bank statements on the website answered the question perfectly. Everyone was currently scrolling through the highlighted transactions, proving that Chloe, the supposed victim of my financial abuse, was buying $3,000 Chanel handbags and premium spa packages using a credit card tied directly to my personal checking account. Her sob story about freezing in the dark unraveled the second people realized she had actively drained the resources that could have paid those utility bills 10 times over. She was not a helpless victim. She was a financial parasite caught red-handed. Following closely behind Chloe's exposure was the total destruction of Richard's patriarchal authority. The extended family was currently reviewing the promissory notes and high-interest casino loans I had uploaded. The illusion of my father as a wise, successful businessman collapsed under the weight of his hidden gambling debts. My aunts and uncles who had lent him money over the years under the guise of temporary cash flow issues were now seeing the undeniable proof that he had fed their hard-earned cash directly into slot machines and poker tables. I was the one who had bailed him out of foreclosure. But the most magnificent implosion was happening within Marcus' family. The Atlanta relatives who had fiercely defended his entrepreneurial honor were now confronting the horrific reality of the Marcus Investment Fund tab. I watched the analytics dashboard track multiple downloads of the IRS reporting confirmation document. They were staring at the itemized ledger, proving that his revolutionary tech startup was nothing more than a slush fund for his nightlife. Instead of software development receipts, they were reading the exact dollar amounts he blew at downtown bars, luxury car dealerships, and VIP lounges. He had paraded around Atlanta acting like a wealthy tech founder while entirely funded by my corporate salary. The shame his relatives must have felt for publicly defending him would quickly weaponize into intense fury. The digital silence finally broke, but it was no longer a chorus of hatred directed at me. My phone began to buzz with a completely different energy. Aunt Martha sent a frantic message to the group chat, demanding Richard explain the casino loans immediately. Marcus' uncle posted a furious comment tagging Marcus directly asking why business seed money was used to lease a luxury SUV. Chloe hastily deleted her entire sob story post from her social media page, but it was far too late. The screenshots and the link were already circulating wildly. The narrative had completely flipped. The hunters had suddenly become the hunted. I sat in my quiet office watching my family scramble to defend the indefensible. The silent counterstrike had leveled their entire world, and I had not raised my voice once. I reached across my desk and picked up my warm ceramic coffee mug. I took a slow sip, savoring the absolute perfection of the moment. I had not needed to stoop to their level of public screaming. I had simply turned on the lights and allowed the world to see them scatter. The financial audit was a weapon they could never defeat. They were completely exposed, stripped of their illusions, and left to face their embarrassed relatives. I sat back and watched the digital carnage unfold in real time across my dual monitors. The family group chat, which had briefly gone silent under the crushing weight of my evidence, suddenly erupted into an absolute war zone. Marcus' extended relatives from Atlanta led the relentless charge. His uncle Thomas, a hard-working man who owned a successful commercial plumbing business in Georgia, posted a blistering multi-paragraph message. Thomas demanded to know exactly why Marcus had been parading around their family reunions in custom-tailored suits, while his sister-in-law financed his entire existence. Thomas wrote that Marcus had brought profound shame upon their family name and demanded he apologize immediately. Marcus' cousins chimed in relentlessly, tagging him in comments asking if his entire entrepreneurial personality was just a cheap rental. The sheer humiliation of being exposed as a massive fraud by the very people he constantly tried to impress completely broke Marcus. He had spent years meticulously cultivating the persona of a brilliant tech founder and a wealthy provider. Now his own blood relatives were openly calling him a pathetic leech and demanding he pay them back for the flights they booked to attend his fake holiday celebration. The pressure cooker of the freezing suburban house finally exploded. My phone screen lit up with a direct message from my cousin Greg, who was apparently receiving live updates from another relative trapped inside the dark living room. Greg forwarded me a series of chaotic text messages describing the horrific scene currently playing out in the pitch-black house. Marcus and Chloe had completely turned on each other like starving wolves. According to the forwarded texts, Marcus began screaming at Chloe for making him look like an absolute fool in front of his respected uncle. He blamed her entirely for losing my financial support and for writing that pathetic social media post that triggered my devastating retaliation. Chloe fired right back, shrieking at the top of her lungs that Marcus was a deadbeat loser who blew my investment money on bottle service and VIP tables instead of building a real company to support their unborn child. The golden couple who had spent years acting infinitely superior to my single workaholic status were now tearing each other apart in the freezing dark. Chloe accused Marcus of ruining her life and destroying her social standing. Marcus refused to take the blame. He packed a duffel bag by the dim light of his smartphone flashlight and stormed out the front door, abandoning his pregnant wife on Christmas Eve. He drove away in the luxury SUV that I was no longer paying for, leaving her sobbing on the frozen hardwood floor. The destruction of their perfect marriage was a magnificent spectacle, but the implosion of my parents was even more devastating to witness. The revelation of the gambling debts detailed on my website struck my mother Helen like a physical blow. She had spent decades projecting the image of a flawless upper-class matriarch, carefully hiding my father's financial failures behind a thin veneer of country club respectability. But my comprehensive audit revealed several high-interest casino loans that even she did not know existed. I watched the group chat as Aunt Martha, Helen's own sister, demanded an explanation for a specific $50,000 promissory note that Richard had hidden from everyone. Helen attempted to deflect the questions to save face, but Richard finally snapped under the overwhelming pressure. The stress of the freezing house, the screaming relatives, and his shattered patriarchal authority pushed him completely over the edge. He sent a massive paragraph to the family chat, shifting the blame entirely onto my mother. Richard declared that if Helen had not been so obsessed with punishing me and illegally transferring the rural property deed to Chloe, they would not be facing total financial ruin right now. Helen responded with absolute fury, typing out messages in all capital letters. She accused Richard of gambling away their retirement and destroying their generational legacy. The group chat became a public arena for their deepest marital resentments. They traded vicious insults, exposing decades of hidden resentments and toxic behavior. Helen blamed Richard for being a weak provider who forced her to rely on my income. Richard blamed Helen for raising an entitled, demanding monster like Chloe, who constantly drained their resources. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect suburban family evaporated completely into the digital ether. Their friends and extended relatives watched in horrified fascination as the respected elders of our family aired their dirtiest laundry for everyone to read. They were supposed to be hosting a sophisticated holiday gathering. Instead, they were shivering in a dark house, screaming at each other while their guests scrambled to book immediate flights back to Atlanta. I did not need to lift another finger or utter a single word to punish them. They were executing the harsh punishment themselves with absolute ruthless efficiency. The absolute silence in my luxury penthouse was deeply comforting. I watched the frantic notifications roll in, sipping my coffee, as the villains of my story systematically dismantled their own lives. They had pushed me out into the cold, assuming I would freeze alone. Instead, I built a fortress and watched them lock themselves outside in the brutal winter of their own making. The implosion was total and permanent. There was no coming back from the secrets they had just revealed to each other. The faction was dead, and they had willingly handed me the shovel to bury them. The ultimate realization that I held absolute power over my own destiny filled me with profound satisfaction. I closed the web browser. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the smooth wooden desk. Every single notification that popped across my dual monitors served as a brilliant testament to my newfound freedom. The heavy chains of familial obligation were completely shattered. They could never manipulate me again. I smiled widely, knowing my future belonged solely to me. The chaotic week following Christmas bled into a surprisingly peaceful transition toward the new year. While my family spent the remaining days of December scrambling to salvage their shattered reputations and shivering in the freezing ruins of their suburban fortress, I directed my focus entirely toward closing the most lucrative business transaction of my professional career. The date was December 31st, New Year's Eve morning. I sat at my polished mahogany desk reviewing the final digital signatures on a massive stack of commercial real estate documents. For the past 6 months, I had been quietly negotiating the sale of the suburban property. The buyer was not a young family looking for a starter home or a casual real estate investor. It was a ruthless commercial development corporation renowned for purchasing large residential lots and razing them to the ground to build premium mixed-use retail complexes. The sprawling lot my parents occupied happened to be the exact keystone parcel the developers desperately needed to complete their massive zoning block. Because they needed it so desperately, I commanded an astronomical price. The final sale amount transferred into my primary holding account this morning, representing a profit margin that secured my generational wealth 10 times over. I was now exceptionally rich. I checked my designer watch. The time was exactly 10 in the morning. A specialized legal courier service I retained yesterday was currently pulling into the icy driveway of that suburban house. I pulled up the secure tracking portal on my secondary monitor, watching the GPS beacon pulse directly over their address. I could vividly imagine the miserable state of my parents and my sister Chloe. The utility companies had refused to reconnect their services without massive upfront deposits they could no longer afford. They were likely huddled together in the dark living room, wearing multiple layers of winter clothing, surrounded by the rotting remnants of their ruined holiday feast. Marcus was long gone, having fled back to Atlanta to escape the looming federal tax audit. Helen and Richard were trapped with the daughter they had spoiled into absolute uselessness. The digital tracking portal updated with a bright green confirmation notification. The package had been successfully delivered and signed for by Richard. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair waiting for the inevitable explosion. The courier did not hand them a polite warning or a standard 30-day notice to quit. The thick manila envelope Richard just accepted contained a formal expedited eviction notice backed by emergency commercial zoning laws. The developers had successfully filed the expedited demolition permits the moment the funds cleared my account. The bold legal text printed on the first page of the document left zero room for negotiation or emotional manipulation. It stated clearly that ownership of the property had been permanently transferred to a commercial entity. The current occupants were classified as unauthorized squatters. They had exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises completely. If they remained inside the structure past the 3-day deadline, local law enforcement would physically remove them to clear the path for the heavy demolition machinery. The bulldozers were literally scheduled to arrive on the morning of January 4th to tear down their pristine suburban illusion. It took exactly 4 minutes for my smartphone to ring. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I let it ring 3 times before swiping the green icon to accept the call. I did not offer a greeting. I just listened to the heavy, frantic breathing on the other end of the line. Vivian. Richard gasped, his voice trembling with a level of raw terror I had never heard from him before. Tell me this is a joke. Tell me this is just another one of your tactics to punish us. A man in a suit just handed me an eviction notice saying the house has been sold. It says we have to leave in 3 days because the property is scheduled for commercial demolition. You did not sell our family home. You could not possibly do something so incredibly vicious. I kept my voice perfectly level and professional, matching the tone I used during high-stakes corporate negotiations. I absolutely sold the property, Dad, I replied smoothly. The commercial developers offered me a massive premium for the land, and I accepted. The funds cleared my account this morning. You are no longer residing in my house. You are currently trespassing on commercial property owned by a multi-billion-dollar development firm. They do not care about your holiday plans, and they certainly do not care about your comfort. They only care about clearing that lot to pour concrete. You sold the house, Helen shrieked from the background, her voice echoing through the receiver. She must have snatched the phone from his hands. Vivian, you sold the roof right over our heads. Where are we supposed to go? Chloe is pregnant and freezing. We have no money and our credit is completely destroyed. You are throwing your own mother out onto the freezing street on New Year's Eve. You are a monster. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting her hysterical accusations wash over me, without leaving a single mark. You transferred a heavily indebted property to Chloe last week, Mom, I reminded her coldly. Why do not you all pack up and move to that beautiful rural estate you were so proud of? Oh, right, because the predatory debt collectors are currently seizing it. You played a stupid game to try and ruin me, and you lost everything. The house is gone. You have exactly 3 days to pack whatever fits in your car before the wrecking ball smashes through that grand living room. Happy New Year. I ended the call immediately, ignoring the loud, panicked wailing radiating from the speaker. I placed the phone down on my smooth desk, feeling profound satisfaction wrapping around my mind like a warm blanket. I watched the screens, feeling entirely victorious today. The piece lasted exactly 2 hours. At noon, the sleek intercom on my desk chimed with a priority alert from the ground floor security desk. I pressed the silver button, allowing the voice of the head security guard to fill my quiet office. Ms. Vivian, we have a situation in the lobby. 3 individuals claiming to be your family are down here. They are highly agitated and demanding to be allowed up to the 40th floor. They are causing quite a disturbance, and one of them keeps shouting about an eviction. I instructed the guard to deny them elevator access, and informed him I would be down shortly to handle the trespassers personally. I smoothed my tailored blazer, checking my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I looked completely unbothered. I rode the private executive elevator down to the ground floor, allowing the smooth descent to perfectly center my focus. The doors slid open to reveal the sprawling marble expanse of the corporate lobby. It was a cathedral of modern commerce filled with polished steel, towering indoor trees, and wealthy professionals moving with urgent purpose. In the very center of this pristine environment stood my biological family, looking utterly out of place and thoroughly defeated. The winter storm had clearly taken a brutal toll on them. Helen was wrapped in a mismatched coat, her usually flawless hair flat and disheveled from days without heating or hot water. Richard looked completely broken, his shoulders slumped and his hands trembling at his sides. Chloe was clinging to his arm, looking pale and genuinely terrified, now that her arrogant husband Marcus had abandoned her to face the federal consequences alone. They looked like refugees fleeing a disaster zone of their own creation. The moment Helen spotted me stepping out of the executive elevator, she broke away from the security guards and sprinted across the polished marble floor. Vivian! She shrieked, her voice echoing terribly against the high glass ceilings, causing several passing executives to stop and stare. Vivian, please, you have to listen to us. You cannot do this. We have absolutely nowhere to go. I stood perfectly still, locking my hands behind my back as she approached. I did not offer a greeting. I simply let her erratic energy crash against my absolute calm. Richard hurried over, dragging Chloe along with him. He looked up at the towering ceiling and the imposing security guards before looking back at me with a desperate, pleading expression. Vivian, please, he begged, his voice cracking with raw panic. We are your family. We are your blood. You cannot just throw your own flesh and blood out onto the freezing street on New Year's Eve. We made mistakes, but we are still your parents. You cannot erase the fact that we brought you into this world. We are begging you to call the developers and stop the demolition. Give us a month to figure something out. I stared at him, watching the pathetic display of a man who had completely lost his patriarchal authority. Chloe stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. She reached out, trying to grab my arm, but I took a deliberate step backward, avoiding her touch. Vivian. I am pregnant, she sobbed heavily, using her ultimate weapon one final time. Marcus left me. He took the car and he left me alone because he is terrified of the tax audit. I have nothing. If you kick us out of the house, I will have to sleep in a shelter. You are an aunt to this baby. You cannot let your own niece or nephew be born in the streets. We are family, Vivian. Families fight, but they do not destroy each other. Helen suddenly collapsed forward. She did not just slump, she physically dropped to her knees on the cold, hard marble floor of the corporate lobby, right in front of the security desk and dozens of my peers. Richard immediately followed, sinking to his knees beside his wife. Chloe let out a loud wail and dropped down next to them, awkwardly clutching her stomach. The three of them kneeled before me in a grotesque theatrical display of absolute submission. It was the ultimate manipulation tactic designed to force my hand through sheer public embarrassment. They believed that by creating a humiliating spectacle in my professional sanctuary, I would instantly cave to their demands just to make the scene stop. Please, Vivian. Helen wailed from the floor, reaching out to grab the hem of my trousers. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Forgive us. We were wrong about everything. We were stupid and proud, but we love you. You are our daughter. Please do not let them tear down our home. Have mercy on your family. I looked down at the three people kneeling at my feet. A few years ago, this sight would have shattered my heart into a million pieces. I would have rushed forward, pulled them up, and written a massive check to save them from their consequences. I would have sacrificed my own financial security and my own mental health just to secure a fleeting moment of their conditional approval. But standing there now, bathed in the cold winter light filtering through the lobby windows, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sorrow, no lingering obligation. I analyzed their kneeling forms not as a tragic family tableau, but as a transparent psychological strategy. They were not kneeling out of genuine remorse or sudden moral awakening. They were kneeling because their bank accounts were empty. They were kneeling because their fake friends had abandoned them. They were kneeling because the bulldozers were literally warming up their engines. They were mourning the loss of my money, not the loss of their daughter. I watched them groveling on the floor of the lobby, fully prepared to deliver the one final absolute rejection that would permanently sever every single remaining toxic tie between us once and for all. I did not immediately speak. I let the absolute silence of my refusal hang heavily in the vast corporate lobby. The bustling noise of executives and messengers passing by seemed to fade into a muted background hum, leaving only the pathetic sounds of my mother's manufactured sobs echoing against the cold marble. The security guards stood at strict attention, watching the spectacle with professional detachment. They were waiting for my signal to either intervene or stand down. I looked at the top of my father's graying head as he knelt before me, a man who had spent his entire life demanding unearned respect and projecting unyielding authority over every room he entered. Now he was just a desperate debtor, begging his primary creditor for a stay of execution. I looked at my sister clutching her pregnant belly, using her unborn child as a human shield against the crushing consequences of her own horrific financial negligence. I looked at my mother, whose perfectly manicured hands were grasping at the empty air near my tailored trousers, desperately trying to reel me back into her toxic orbit. They were a portrait of ultimate defeat. They looked absolutely nothing like family. They simply looked like strangers who had finally run out of other people's money. "Get up, Dad," I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy air with the precision of a surgical blade. The cold authority in my tone made him flinch physically. He slowly raised his head, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a desperate, pleading panic. "Do not demean yourself any further by kneeling on a public floor. It will not change the outcome. You invoked the concept of blood and family to try and manipulate my conscience, but you fundamentally misunderstand what those words actually mean. Family is supposed to be a sanctuary. Family is supposed to be a mutual exchange of care and respect. You did not treat me like family for the past 7 years. You treated me like a highly convenient asset. When you gambled away your financial security, you did not act like a protective father. You acted like a parasite perfectly willing to drain my resources so you could continue playing the wealthy patriarch at your exclusive country club. You only care about the concept of family right now because the commercial developers are warming up their bulldozers. Your definition of family is entirely conditional on my willingness to write the checks. That condition is permanently terminated. I shifted my unwavering gaze to my younger sister. Chloe was staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes, her dramatic weeping momentarily suspended by the absolute ice in my voice. And you, Chloe. I continued, my tone devoid of any sisterly affection. You are kneeling here crying about your unborn child and demanding that I rescue you from the massive mess your husband created. You stood by and cheered while Marcus insulted my career. You bought designer handbags with my credit card and then went on social media to accuse me of trying to freeze your baby to death. You eagerly accepted the deed to that rural property, hoping to cash in on a secret inheritance and leave me with absolutely nothing. You made your choices. You chose to marry a man who built his entire personality on fraud. You chose to accept a property deed without conducting a single financial audit. The debt collectors hunting you right now are not my fault. The fact that Marcus took the luxury SUV and abandoned you is not my responsibility. You are an adult about to become a mother. It is time you actually learn how to survive without your older sister paying your way. Helen let out a sharp wailing cry, reaching up again. Vivian, please, she sobbed, her voice cracking under the weight of her impending homelessness. We are so sorry. We will do anything. We can go to therapy. We can fix this. You cannot be this cruel to your own mother. I stepped back, creating a deliberate physical boundary between us. The absolute hypocrisy of her tears finally triggered the memory I had kept buried deep inside for 3 long years. Cruel. I repeated the word, tasting like ash on my tongue. You want to talk to me about cruelty, Mom? Let us take a brief walk down memory lane to a very specific night 3 years ago. I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from an emergency appendectomy. A severe infection had kept me out of work for weeks, and my medical insurance had a massive gap. I was terrified and in agonizing physical pain. I called you and Dad begging for a temporary $5,000 loan just to cover the immediate hospital bills and keep my apartment while I recovered. Do you remember exactly what you told me while I was crying through the heavy pain medication? Helen froze, her tear-stained face draining of all remaining color. The memory clearly hit her like a physical blow. Richard looked down at the marble floor, completely unable to meet my gaze. I remember your exact words, Mom. I continued, my voice rising just enough to ensure the security guards heard every single syllable of her shame. You told me that I was a successful corporate woman and I needed to figure it out myself. You told me that family funds were strictly tied up because Marcus desperately needed seed money for his incredibly important visionary startup. You prioritized the fake business venture of your fraudulent son-in-law over the physical survival of your own biological daughter. You left me to drown in medical debt while you threw lavish dinner parties to celebrate Marcus. You looked at me in my darkest, most vulnerable moment, and you firmly shut the door. I looked down at the 3 of them, absorbing the profound silence that followed my revelation. The truth hung in the bright lobby air, completely undeniable and utterly devastating. They had no counter-argument. There was no excuse they could fabricate to justify that level of betrayal. You taught me a very valuable lesson that day, Mom. I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. You taught me that in this family, survival is an entirely solo endeavor. You taught me to figure it out. And I did. I figured out how to secure my own wealth. I figured out how to stop funding my own abusers. I figured out how to sell the very ground beneath your feet to a commercial development firm. You set the rules of engagement 3 years ago. I am simply playing by the exact rules you created. I turned away from them, signaling to the head security guard with a brief commanding nod. Please escort these unauthorized individuals out of the building, I instructed clearly. If they resist or return, I want them formally charged with trespassing. I did not look back at their horrified faces. I did not pause to listen to Helen's sudden, renewed wailing. I simply looked over my shoulder and delivered the final, absolute severing blow. Happy house hunting. I turned on my heel and walked straight toward the private elevator. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me, cutting off the pathetic sounds of my biological family weeping on the polished floor. As the elevator ascended, soaring back up to the 40th floor, I felt a profound physical shift in my body. The chronic tension that had lived in my shoulders for 7 long years completely evaporated. The heavy, suffocating cloak of their conditional love and endless financial demands fell away, leaving me lighter than air. I had finally excised the rot from my life. I spent the remainder of the afternoon finalizing the commercial real estate transfer and wrapping up my corporate audits for the year. My desk was perfectly clean. My financial portfolios were immaculate. My personal life was finally exclusively mine. I left the office early, stepping out into the crisp winter evening with a renewed sense of absolute purpose. When I returned to my downtown penthouse, the space felt entirely different. It was no longer just a fortress to hide in, it was a sanctuary to celebrate. The evening was dedicated to preparing for the transition into the new year. I took a long hot shower, washing away the last lingering traces of the morning lobby confrontation. I chose my outfit with deliberate care. I bypassed the conservative corporate suits I wore to appease their expectations and selected a stunning emerald green silk gown. It was vibrant, powerful, and unapologetically bold. I poured myself a glass of vintage champagne and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city below begin to sparkle with anticipation. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the streets clean and bright. I felt a deep, resounding peace. I was 33 years old, incredibly wealthy, highly respected in my field, and for the first time in my life, I was completely free. At 9 o'clock, I took a private car to a spectacular penthouse venue overlooking the harbor. My mentor David had rented the entire top floor of the prestigious building to host an exclusive New Year's Eve gala for our closest circle. The moment I stepped out of the elevator, the atmosphere enveloped me in genuine warmth. A live jazz band played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with silver trays of gourmet hors d'oeuvres. Crystal glasses clinked in joyful celebration. This was my true chosen family. Maya rushed over immediately, pulling me into a fierce hug and complimenting my gown. Sarah handed me a fresh flute of champagne, her eyes sparkling with knowing triumph. We spent the next 3 hours surrounded by people who celebrated my ambition rather than resenting it. I engaged in brilliant conversations with industry leaders who respected my intellect. I danced with friends who never asked me for a single dime. There were no petty jealousies, no passive-aggressive insults, and no demands for financial bailouts. There was only mutual respect and authentic joy. I looked around the room, marveling at the life I had successfully built with my own 2 hands. As the clock inched closer to midnight, the energy in the penthouse reached a fever pitch. The band transitioned into an upbeat tempo, and the guests began gathering near the massive glass windows to secure a prime view of the fireworks display. I stood near the balcony, leaning against the polished railing with Maya and Sarah by my side. With only 5 minutes left until the new year, my smartphone vibrated softly inside my clutch. I pulled the device out. The screen illuminated the dim corner of the room. A text message notification hovered on the lock screen. It was from Helen. Despite being escorted out of my building by security, despite facing imminent eviction, she was still trying to fire one last manipulative shot. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. Vivian, you have destroyed this family. We are sleeping in a cheap motel because the developers locked the gates. Chloe is hysterical, and your father will not speak to me. I hope your money keeps you warm tonight because you are going to die a lonely, miserable woman. You will regret this when you have no one left. I read the words twice, analyzing the desperate venom dripping from every syllable. She was still trying to weaponize my fear of loneliness. She was still trying to convince me that existing without their toxic presence was a punishment rather than a blessing. I looked up from the screen and glanced around the crowded room. I saw David raising his glass to me from across the floor. I heard Maya laughing at a joke. I felt the presence of a dozen people who genuinely valued my existence. I was the furthest thing from lonely. The crowd began the final countdown. 10, 9, 8. I looked down at the text message from my mother. I did not type a response. I did not feel a pang of guilt. I tapped the information icon next to her contact name. 7, 6, 5. I scrolled down to the bottom of the menu where a command sat waiting in red text. 4, 3. I tapped the button labeled Block this caller. A prompt appeared asking me to confirm the action. 2, 1. I hit confirm. The screen immediately went black. 0. The city erupted. Massive bursts of crimson fireworks exploded across the midnight sky, shattering the winter darkness. The booming sound reverberated through the glass windows, rattling in my chest. The crowd cheered, raising their glasses to toast the new year. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and turned my face toward the blinding light of the fireworks. My past was erased. My fortune was secured. The toxic anchors holding me down were cut loose and sinking to the bottom of the ocean. I raised my flute, joining the chorus of cheering voices, welcoming the new year. I sipped the fine champagne. The taste was perfect. I breathed free air. The story of Vivian teaches us a powerful lesson about the absolute necessity of setting boundaries, even with those we call family. We often confuse unconditional love with unconditional tolerance for emotional and financial abuse. Vivian's journey illustrates that true empowerment comes when we stop subsidizing our own disrespect and refuse to be held hostage by guilt or toxic obligations. You cannot buy genuine affection, and cutting harmful ties is sometimes the only way to build a healthy, authentic life. Protect your peace and recognize your true worth. Have you ever had to draw a difficult line with a toxic relative? Share your experience in the comments below.